I won't let you die an honorable sailor's death.
Even though it was a sudden attack, Harold had to do it, so the stoker was not a threat to his colleague. However, Harold had mentioned in an interview in the New York Times about Jack's heroic actions that night. How Phillips must work through it, I don't know. He was a brave man. I learnt to love him that night. I will never live to forget what Phillips did for the last awful 15 minutes. When the two men reached the boat deck, they tried to find the nearest lifeboat to escape the sinking vessel. However, once they were there, the pair separated, and Jack was never seen again.
John, there she is! John! John! How can I help, sir?
I need to prop that side up.
Heave ho! Get me out of here! Guys! Get it off! Guys! Get this off! I can't breathe! Somebody get me out of here! There's water getting here!
Harold eventually managed to escape underneath the lifeboat and survived the night. Meanwhile, Frank Prentice ran up to the boat deck to escape the water on the ship.
We were up on the poop deck, four of us, and she was sinking fast then. She'd righted herself. And Rix went, and Kieran went. And I was there by myself then, thinking, and all of a sudden she lifted up quickly, and you could hear everything crashing through her. Everything that was movable was going through her.
However, Second Officer Charles Lightoller had a near escape.
I turned forward and took a header from the top of the wheelhouse. I started to swim away, but got sucked down 2 or 3 times. In fact, I got mighty near the edge of things before I finally came up alongside the collapsible. We'd hove into the water from the top of the officers' quarters, and there I hung on. A bit later, the forward funnel guys carried away, and the funnel, weighing perhaps 50 or 60 tons, fell down with a crash on the water. It missed the raft and some of us hanging onto it, by inches. But there were a good many it didn't miss. Next thing I remember, I was still hanging on to a bit of rope attached to the raft, but some 30 or 40 yards away from the ship. The wash of the falling funnel had evidently picked us up, raft and all, and flung us clear of the ship altogether. Several of us scrambled up onto the slippery bottom of the raft, and it was from there I saw the Titanic sink.
Suddenly, passengers and crew in the lifeboats and the water had witnessed a disturbing sight.
The water had crept up almost to the captain's bridge, and it seemed a question only of minutes before she sank. The Titanic's lights still shone brightly, and I found myself wondering if those in cabins now below the surface were also ablaze. As we sat gazing at the Titanic, she tilted slowly up, revolving apparently about the centre of gravity just astern of midships, until she attained a vertically upright position. And there she remained motionless.
And then, a horrible fear was in my heart, and I think everybody else's, that the dreadful, dreadful suction that had drawn us towards the Titanic would suck us under the Titanic.
As I watched, I could see her bow getting deeper and deeper in the water, with the foremast sticking up above the surface, whilst her stern lifted higher and higher, till it was right out of the water. When she got to an angle of about 60 degrees, there was a sullen sort of rumbling roar, as her massive boilers all left their beds and went crashing down through the bulk's heads and everything that stood in their way.
And I saw that ship break in half, and the forepart went down nose first and the stern of that ship stood up in the water for quite a long time, or it seemed a long time to me, and then keeled over.
Then it began to slide gently downwards. Its speed increased as it went down head first, so that the stern shot down with a rush. The lights continued to burn till it sank. We could see the people packed densely in the stern till it was gone.
And then she went down and seemed to come up again. So I thought, well, now I'm going to leave. And I was hanging on to a board. We had two boards, starboard and port, which said, keep clear of propeller blades. And I was hanging on to one of these, and I was getting higher and higher in the air. And I thought, well, now I'll go. And I dropped in. I had a lifeboat on. And I hit the water with a terrific crack. Luckily, I didn't hit anything when I dropped in. And then I looked up at the Titanic. The propellers were right out of water, the rudder was right out, and you could see the bottom. And then gradually she glided away. That was the last of the Titanic.
You could hear the screams of the people on the ship, you know. It was really terrible. There was a lot of men on rafts and that, frozen, you know, some of them dead. And it was very bad.
As the ship sank, we could hear the screaming a mile away. Gradually, it became fainter and fainter and died away. Some of the lifeboats that had room for more might have gone to their rescue, but it would have meant that those who were in the water would have swarmed aboard and sunk her.
However, there was a story of a man who swam for his life. Arthur John Priest, known as the unsinkable stoker, jumped into the water when the stern was high in the air. Arthur was unfortunate to wear inappropriate clothing, wearing nothing but shorts and a thin cotton shirt. Arthur screamed and cried for help, hoping that he'd be rescued.
Arthur John Priest is a very unknown character of the Titanic and other vessels that he sailed on. In fact, he didn't really speak about his times on the vessels. He was a stoker on all these ships. That was his job, and it was a hard job. It was the toughest job you could get on the vessel, because a lot of the time you'd be stuck in the boiler rooms, and there would be hot furnaces, and it was boiling hot, and in a lot of cases it was that hot. It was as if you was this was on a daily basis, and you would have long shifts in these rooms. And the boilers would, in fact, a lot of people would, a lot of the men would be burnt with ash on their skin. When the Titanic struck the iceberg, there's a lot of, we don't know exactly how he got off the Titanic when it sank, but we know that when he went down, when he was on the Titanic, when he come off the Titanic, he had got frostbitten toes. So at some point, either whether it was in the boiler rooms or he'd come into contact with the sea at some point. We think, a lot of people think he was in Lifeboat 15, but that we don't know for sure which lifeboat or how he got off the Titanic.
Around 15 to 20 minutes later, there was nothing but stillness and quiet. Some survivors wanted to help the people in the water. Sadly, most lifeboats never returned to pick up survivors. However, Lifeboat 4 did, and it was in that boat, with the suggestion by Madeline Astor, that a familiar face would save another man's life. Frank was still in the water, swimming around the cries of people screaming for help. When he was spotted by the crew and passengers on lifeboat number 4, he was put into the lifeboat. And while he was in, he was surprised when he saw Virginia Clark.
By the grace of God, I came across a lifeboat, and they pulled me in. And there was a fireman dead in the bottom, and there was about a foot of water in this boat. There was another man who seemed to be trying to get away from it again. I don't know what was the matter with him. They were tying him down. And the rest were women and children. And I sat on a seat, and I sat next to Mrs. Clark, the girl I'd put into a lifeboat. I was in a pretty bad way then, as you can imagine. Frozen solid almost. And she wrapped me round with a cloak. She had some sort of blanket or a coat on. Anyway, I think she probably saved my life, I don't know. But I saved hers. At least I think I might have done. I think I did. And she saved mine.
However, she lost her husband in the sinking, as did Madeline Astor. It was estimated that out of the 2,208 passengers and crew who were on board the Titanic, 1,517 lives were lost. One of those lost was second-class stewardess Lucy Snape. During the sinking, Lucy was fastening lifebelts on her passengers before she wished them goodbye. Later on, Lucy told some of the stewardesses that she did not expect to see them again. Loretta Ann Miller, host of the podcast Titanic, explains her thoughts on Lucy.
I am such an empathic person that when I know that people are going through a hard time, I will be like, put my stuff aside and I need to care for them and I'll figure out what's going to happen with me later. I feel like I can understand her thinking of that, you know what, I was put on this ship to do a job and something is going wrong and it is still my job to take care of the passengers, and that is what I'm going to do.
There was little that anyone can do to help the people who perished in the water. So, leaving them, the 706 survivors in the lifeboats began to wait for rescue. So, leaving them, the 706 survivors in the lifeboats began to wait for a rescue ship. While they were waiting, many passengers had very different experiences in each lifeboat. Lifeboat 11, the heaviest lifeboat, had no lamp, so a sailor lit a piece of rope using it as a signal. In Lifeboat 13, Lawrence Beasley describes the events that happened following the sinking and what happened when a mysterious ship came to their rescue.
In the absence of any plan of action, we rowed slowly forward, or at least in the general direction that the Titanic's bow had pointed. We felt in the darkness for a light to signal with, also for food and water. We found nothing. About 3:30 a.m., someone in the bow called our attention to a faint, faraway gleam in the southeast. And then a distant boom sounded across the water. The stoker, who had lain all night under the tiller, sat up suddenly, as if from a dream. That was a cannon. With every sense alert, we waited in absolute silence until, creeping over the edge of the sea, we saw a single light and presently a second one below. And in a few moments they were well above the horizon and they remained in line. We didn't know what sort of vessel was coming, but we knew she was coming quickly, and we searched for paper, rags, anything that would burn, our coats if necessary. A hasty paper torch was twisted out of a bundle of letters, lighted and held aloft by our captain. Our faces were dimly illuminated, as was the water surrounding our boat, and I saw for the first time the cause of our present circumstances: ice. The ship stopped some distance away and slowly swung round to reveal herself as a large steamer with all her portholes alight.
Where lagging stream sings la The twilight gleam is in her eyes. The night is on her hair. And like a lovesick Lennon, she hath my heart in thrall. No life I own, nor liberty. With love is Lord of all. And sometimes when the beetle's horn hath lulled the eve to sleep, I steal unto her shieling lorn, and through the drink peep.
And then came the dawn.
There on the cricket's singing stone, she stirs the bogwood fire, and hums in soft, sweet undertones the song of heart's desire.
We drew near to the ship and could make out the bands on her funnel which told she was a Cunarder. Some boats were already at her side by the time we were close enough to read her name. Carpathia.
Next time on Titanic, Titan of the Sea, what happened on board the Carpathia when Cunard's little steamer came to the Titanic's rescue?
They both said independently that the saddest thing was seeing the women of the Titanic line the rail of the Carpathia as each lifeboat pulled up.
Who was to blame for the disaster? And I begin doing some detective work to give my own theory on whether the inquiries were the subject of yellow journalism.
The whole thing about the people saying the ship sank in one piece.
He was only doing what he was told to do.
Doing one in the middle of the ocean is inconvenient. You have to stop the ship.